Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kirsty Jordani. I'm the Executive Director of the International Advertising Association in the UK. And I'm here talking to Dr. Nancy Doyle, who, amongst many things, is the founder of Genius Within. I first met Dr. Nancy last year when the IAA was hosting a Q&A session for parents in our industry who are homeschooling neurodiverse children. And Dr. Nancy very kindly agreed to come on and share her expert advice with us. And so the reason for me that I'm invested in this is I have experience of neurodiversity in my family. So for me personally, my hope is that by the IAA highlighting this topic, I can make a contribution, no matter how small, to the world becoming a more accepting place of neurodiverse people. So Dr. Nancy, perhaps we could start with you just doing a quick introduction about yourself and your work.
Thank you. And I love being called Dr. Nancy. It makes me feel like I've got my own kind of TV show here, and it's like Q&A with Dr. Nancy.
Quite right too. You worked hard for it.
I did, actually. I genuinely did. PhD is equivalent to creating another human being. It felt like I was birthed, a child when I finished that paper. So those papers, I should say, lots of publications. So as Kirsty said, I founded Genius Within, which is a non-profit social enterprise dedicated to making the world a more neuro-inclusive place. We are workplace specialists. I'm an occupational psychologist, which is the management science and the psychology of careers and workplaces. And Genius Within provides support for adults who are in work, provides support for workplaces on how to be more neuro-inclusive. And we also work with individuals who are long-term unemployed and who are also in prison, because actually, while the workplace is becoming more neuro-inclusive, it's not there yet. And a lot of people are out of work. A lot of people are in the criminal justice system. And so a point of principle for us is to go where it's hard and support people, as well as where it's kind of easy and shiny and a nice project, which there are a lot of these days, which there absolutely weren't when I started my career 25 years ago in this field. Genius Within sponsor, and I'm a co-director of the Research Centre for Neurodiversity at Work at Birkbeck, University of London. And we've recently launched the centre to bring management science into the neurodiversity at work field. We feel that kind of management science and HR is a little bit behind the curve. And so as this is our specialism, we are wanting to drive research and evidence-based practice in this field, and kind of draw that loop together between, what universities are researching and what neurodiverse or neurodivergent adults want research to be about. A lot of neurodiversity research is kind of genetic or clinical or neuroscience. And actually, that while that's very interesting and it's important that we understand more about, the differences in the human brain, we also need to know what to do about it. And so the idea with Genius Within and Birkbeck joining up is that we draw that link between what we're doing in practice and, having some good evaluation, some objective analysis of themes and patterns, and what we can advise new HR and management scientists going into practice. So that's very much our plan.
That's amazing. And then hopefully we'll get to the point where it just becomes ingrained in every single hiring policy. And yeah,
that's the plan. Yeah, absolutely. And at the centre, we are a neurodiverse staff team. So one of the things we're doing in the centre is we're sponsoring the PhDs of neurominority students. So I'm ADHD, and I got my PhD under the supervision of my now co-director, Professor Almut McDowell, who has also sponsored an autistic woman through to completing her PhD, looking at ADHD in the workplace, Dr. Kirsty Lauder, and we have other neurodiverse students on the programme. So the idea is to kind of not make this, the way we think about them over there, but to actually make it our field of practice, our field of research, and to have voices of lived experience developing the profession and developing the professional skills to kind of make the field have more depth as well as breadth.
Amazing. It's fantastic. So just thinking about right now, so we've obviously been through 12 months of unimaginable change to our whole lives, with lockdown, with working from home. And I think it's fair to say that different people have experienced this in different ways. And so as we are gradually returning to the office, what would you say that companies could do to help create a more inclusive environment for the whole workforce, but especially for neuro minorities who may have experienced the last 12 months a bit differently?
I mean, there's been winners and losers, hasn't there, in the pandemic? And there is a proliferation at the moment of research in the management science field about kind of the new normal and what we've learned. And certainly for some people, this has worked really well. So think about the number of disabled people and not, neurodiversity specifically, but disability more generally. For years, I've worked in disability support. And for years, I've recommended things like remote working, flexible hours, as an accommodation or an adjustment. And individuals have been told, no, it's not reasonable to do that and it can't be done. And actually now we know it can. So I think that's a real win for the disability community at large. What we've started to do in our businesses, we've started to realise that we need to manage by output, not by input. And so it's not about how often people are sitting at their desk. It's about the quality of their work. And some people need quiet to do that. And some people have that quiet at home more than they do in the office. And, arguably not everybody does. And that's been an important distinction between the winners and the losers in the pandemic, is who has had the space to work at home. I was listening to Radio 4 the other day, and an author was talking about how one day she actually had to hide in her daughter's Wendy house for 2 hours.
I can relate to that.
I know. So there are kind of those differences which we shouldn't overlook, because they're very based on resourcing and gender. And so, we need to be intersectional in our appreciation. But certainly, commuting is a sensory overwhelm. And so for many autistic people, particularly, and ADHD people who have those kind of heightened sensory experiences, by the time you get to work, you're so close to a meltdown that you can't concentrate. And so even if you're able to do 2 or 3 days a week where you don't have to do that commuting run, that's going to be going forward a massive blessing. So I think many people in that circumstance, what we've seen is productivity has gone up as a result of the pandemic. The other thing that's true for a lot of neuro minorities is the pace of work. So many of us experience things like hyperfocus, which is where we can get so into what we're doing that you can't talk to us about anything until we've just finished. And, when I'm in hyperfocus, I might work 12 hours, 15 hours, or, 3 days straight. But then I need time off afterwards. I need to walk the dog. I need to go for a run. I need to go and get my hair done if I'm allowed out of the house. And so that kind of uneven pace of work is something, as a self-employed person, that's why I have my own business. That's why I've never worked in corporate life, because I can't do that Monday to Friday, even paced day of work. I need to do big bursts and then rest and recuperate, big bursts and then rest and recuperate. And the other thing that I've noticed working over the last year is everybody's upped their accessibility technology game. So now PowerPoint has auto captioning as standard. We have learned how to put auto captioning into lots of our video content. People have got better at using alternative text, which is, initially for people with sight loss or who are blind. But actually it can be, alternative text can be really good for people who don't necessarily get metaphor as well. So if you have an alternative text description that goes with a picture, people who are a bit confused about the social meaning of an image can get that additional detail. So lots of those things have come into place that have widened the gates for lots of people, I think, and that's a real plus. But then what we also have is, it's harder to build rapport. It's harder to develop social cohesion. And so if someone finds that difficult anyway, not being able to meet people in person has been a drain. And so while it might have had an initial burst of productivity, over time, it's starting to really deplete. one of the things I've been doing at Genius Within. Genius Within is a 60% disabled company. So 60% of our staff identify as disabled and / or neurodivergent diverse. So, what we've noticed, what I've said to everyone at work is we need to practice pre-forgiveness. So the idea is we all agree that we're going to forgive each other because we're going to make some mistakes. We're going to send an email that has a tone that people aren't sure about. We're going to forget to tell someone something because they weren't on the Zoom call and we weren't bumping into them in the kitchen making tea. So, you've got all of these sort of dropped threads and missed opportunities for informal relationship building, which is actually starting to be quite difficult now in lots of
builds up, doesn't it? I think it's fine if it's like for a week, but after a while it builds up. And I read something interesting this week that said you've got to stop saying sorry for everything, not in relation to neurodiversity, but in general, and probably it applies more to certain groups of society than others. But people starting everything with, oh, sorry about this, sorry I haven't done this, starting every Zoom call with sorry about this, sorry about that, and how it's quite good to just agree to eliminate that kind of language.
Absolutely. It's a pre-forgiveness. I forgive you. You're going to annoy me. I'm going to upset you. There's going to be misunderstanding. Let's just pre-forgive and know that we'll just take some extra time to work that out. And I think that sort of thing can really take the pressure off as well. A lot of neurominorities are very self-conscious. We've been told that we're wrong. We've been told off for spelling mistakes. We've been told off because our work wasn't tidy enough, or we missed a deadline, and so we can be oversensitive to those things. And so if we just have a kind of blanket discussion that allows us to just air that stuff and stop being so worried about it, then we can kind of solve the problem. And that's a really strong neuro-inclusive move, is to just actually give forum for talking about that stuff and naming it and not being frightened to say the thing that might be uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's those are some really great kind of guiding principles for how you should interact with your colleagues and manage your team. I think that's fantastic.
I mean, we do say that being neuro-inclusive is actually just good for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. Everybody would benefit from it.
Mm-hmm.
And so just moving on to the topic of universal design. So what can you tell us about that and how it helps companies and people be more inclusive of neuro minorities?
Well, universal design is my secret weapon at the moment. So right. It's a set of principles that I have imported from other areas of disability management science. So universal design is actually built into the legislation for all developed nations' disability policies. So it's fundamentally part of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And it's the idea that if you're going to be disability inclusive, you have to have a two-pronged approach, one of which is making reasonable adjustments or accommodations. Everybody knows about and everybody talks about. Not everybody knows how to do it, but we know it's a thing. But the other thing the legislation talks about consistently is the idea of universal design and how do you create contexts in which individuals are less disabled. And so when we think about this in terms of physical disabilities, we're talking about access ramps and wide doorways and things like that. So it kind of makes logical, practical sense. How do we apply universal design principles to human resources? And that's one of the things I've been writing about and working on at the research centre. I've got a paper coming out in a couple of weeks, which is really a roadmap for how you apply universal design to human resources. And it's about things like, building in tolerance for error, understanding that not everybody is going to go through a process the way you think they're going to. And so therefore you build a flexible boot in. It's things like equitable use. So designing for all possibilities of people rather than kind of designing for neurotypical standards and then making exceptions. Because while I think we'll always need some adjustment and some accommodation, actually it can be quite stigmatizing to ask.
Yeah.
There are some things that we know now are standard and consistent about the way neurominorities might approach recruitment or promotion or performance appraisal or the kind of working conditions. And so instead of being surprised when these things come up, how do we just design them in? When you add up all the different neurominorities, you're talking about 15 to 20% of the human population. So there is an argument for saying we shouldn't wait for people to struggle and then fix it one person at a time. What we should be doing is designing with the idea that some people are going to need to do this differently. And this loops back on my management by output rather than input thing. And I think the autism at work paradigm is a really good example. So we've been doing autism at work projects now for more than 5 years. And what we want to do at the research centre with Genius Within is now ask the question, what have we learned? So what has this taught us? And it's taught us that there's one big principle that we've learned from these programmes, and that is that they work. And that is that when you have a specific program, which is affirmative action, it's an affirmative action program to bring in people with a protected condition, what you get is committed, loyal, talented employees. Wonderful. So now we need to ask the questions. That was always step one. And that's an accommodation. So to make that universal design, what we now need to do is say, so what does this tell us about our recruitment? What were we getting wrong in the way that we used to recruit that meant that we consistently excluded that category of person? And we've had to go around the houses to get them into the business. Well, why don't we just check? Let's just check the way we recruit so that we don't have to go around the houses. Because I think, long term, if we stick with the model that we've got at the moment, actually could end up limiting people rather than including people. Because when you come in on an Autism at Work programme, you have then automatically disclosed something about yourself to the whole company, which may or may not limit your talent potential within that business, depending on how cool the business are. And you could argue that if it limits it, it's probably not the right business to be in anyway. So we could just say that would be great. But also, what about other neurominorities? So what about ADHDers? What about dyslexics? What about people with Rett syndrome? Are we going to have specific programs for all those people as well? Or is it time that we just started changing the way we hire? And that's why we need management science research in this field, because I think it's time we started looking at changing the way we hire. Basically, it needs to go viral in our organizations.
Yeah.
A specific thing.
And then once that starts, then that should help the knock-on effect of the working environment becoming more accepting. And I think it's quite a known thing that people, say with autism, spend a lot of time trying to modify their behavior to fit in with neurotypical people to make them feel more comfortable, when really, and they're having to work extra hard to make these modifications to the way they would naturally want to be. And so we want to reach a place where it's fine for people to be who they are and still be able to offer their talent and their expertise and be able to do well in their careers whilst being themselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I need to make myself redundant. So I need to keep looping this back on this sort of double loop of learning and going, so this is the class of problem we have right now. What needs to change about the system so that we stop getting this class of problem?
Yeah.
And, ideally for my career, if I could make myself redundant about the same time as I'm ready to retire, that would be great.
Perfect. The dream.
Coming together, wouldn't it? But yeah, that's the goal, because the recruitment that we were doing wasn't hiring people who turned out to be best for the job. It means that we've made a mistake. We've made a big mistake. And so much about hiring conventions, performance appraisals, sort of building all these neurotypical norms that have snuck in there over the years that are actually quite meaningless. So, why would you use an interview to hire someone for an analyst job? It just doesn't make sense. No. When I hire for my finance team, I give people a spreadsheet and ask them to find the holes, because that's what I need in the actual job. And so we need to kind of perfect what's the output that we need from people, and do we need all these add-ons like team building and influencing skills, and do we actually need those things, and have they snuck into our performance appraisals as well? Can we go out and do a little cleaning process to get them out of performance skills and allow people to have jobs that are related to their specialism, rather than a bunch of generalists? We've got a bunch of all trades and masters of none, and that's what we hire for. And we repeatedly hire for jacks of all trades, when actually a lot of the things that we're hiring for aren't necessary. kind of multiple choice quizzes that are kind of complex grammar, you're not measuring people's long-term memory. You're measuring their ability to decode complex grammar. And so when we assess the skills of surgeons like that, is that what we want? Or do we want people with high visual acuity and, good dexterity? Because if I was having surgery, I'd want someone who had high visual skills and good dexterity. I really don't care if they can decode grammar. That's not what I'm bothered about. And so we've got all of these kind of mixed messages in our hiring and promoting and appraisal systems. And that's what I think we should be targeting. That's how we'll get to a more neuro-inclusive world. And it does start, unfortunately, with education. And I have a kind of very challenging question that I put to people about that at the moment, which is, at what point are we going to agree that spelling is an obsolete skill?
I hear you.
We all have technology now that reads for us, types for us, checks our spelling, predicts what we're going to write. Why do we have an entire education system that's based on spelling? And why do we have hiring processes that require spelling when we may actually not need that in the job itself anymore or in the world of work anymore? That's my kind of challenging question. And if we were to take those things out, what would happen to the 10% of the population who are dyslexic? Yeah, absolutely. So, you're not disabled anymore, essentially. Yeah. We're saying potentially people will be less disabled, and that's got to be a good thing.
It does feel to me sometimes like some of the guiding principles of education are based on like an outdated ideal of what a child should be, which is sitting still, writing beautifully, spelling beautifully, all of those things. And then you think, is that really what the world needs? I don't know, because like you say, technology now is helping in so many of those ways with typing, voice dictation, all of these things. So how necessary is it that you can join your S up beautifully with your T's? I don't know. In the future, hopefully.
And it's not that those are bad skills to learn, and we need some people who are really specialist at doing those things and are really good at it. But the thing is, if you've got people who absolutely can't do that, but can do all these other things over here, and you're not giving them the accommodation so that they don't have to worry about that stuff, they spend all of their time focused on the things they can't do. And then when they come into the workplace, they've got no self-esteem. They've got no ability to kind of think about what their potential could be, because they're so busy having to prove themselves and so busy having to climb over barriers that they haven't got to their genius within. As an ADHDer, I didn't go to school for the last 2 years of school. Because I have white skin, I got away with that, if I'm perfectly honest with you. My parents and I was able to argue my way to a diagnosis of school phobia, whatever that means. But so I wasn't kind of pegged as a truant, but I was able to work at home because I couldn't handle the loud, busy environment of the school. I just, couldn't work in that environment. It didn't, I couldn't concentrate. I was just distracted the whole time and overwhelmed. So, but in a workplace, I don't need to be in that environment. I can choose my own environment, and I can find an environment that suits me, which is what I've done. And so therefore, what is it about being in a loud, busy place and having to sit still and concentrate in a loud, busy place that we have decided is so essential to human ingenuity? And yet that's the entry level to most careers and the entry level to most jobs. And I think it's really important for employers to remember to just be aware of how deep that goes for neurodivergent staff, because a lot of the time what you're getting is kind of imposter syndrome and fear of failure. And it takes us at Genius Within a long time to, a lot of what we're doing when we do coaching work with our clients, what we're doing is kind of reorientating people back into that space where they know what their skill is, where they know what their mastery is, and they feel confident and able to talk about that, as opposed to constantly apologizing for this or that or the other.
I think that the work you do at Genius Within is just fantastic. So thank you so much. And I will look forward to hearing about your paper that's coming out in a couple of weeks. Will that be on your blog? Is that how we'll find your paper?
It'll be on LinkedIn. I shall probably do a Forbes article with a link to it, and it will be on mine and Genius within social medias. We have a rule at the Birkbeck Centre, which is that we always pay to make sure that all our papers are open access. So a lot of academic publishing is hidden behind a paywall that you either have to pay per paper or only a university has access to it. But actually, if you pay the publishers exorbitant sums of money, they will do it. They will have it freely available, because our whole MO is to raise the kind of credentials and to raise the professionalisation in the field that we're working in. So it will be freely available for everybody to go and read.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.